Good afternoon. It's Friday the 5th of March 2021, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
Well, we've been talking about it. We've been warning about it. More variants coming, and a new variant has been announced today. There he is, sneaking in the background there.
Where's he from?
It's not clear exactly where he's from.
So we've got the Brazilian variant, we've got the South African variant, we've got the Kent variant. And
well, the Kent variant's the UK variant now, and of course
it's been upgraded.
And of course we've got the original and the best. So we've got more variants coming out of our ears than we know what to do with. So scientists have, according to the government, identified 16 cases of another new variant of coronavirus in the UK. Public Health England is designated as a variant under investigation. Trademark, meaning that it's on their watch list, but not one that they're immediately concerned about. It has a mutation in common with the South African and Brazil variants. So again, we ask the question: has this arisen from the immunity escape from the AstraZeneca vaccine trials? We don't know, so this apparently is going to help the virus evade some immunity from vaccination or prior infection. Why is that important? Well, as we pointed out a number of times now, the lockdowns are lifted only if the government's assessment of the risks is not fundamentally changed by new variants of concern.
I see.
Trademark. So this is the situation now, Patrick. We have... The UK now has 8 variants on its watch list, 4 variants of concern, trademark, and 4 variants under investigation, trademark. So the government is producing new terms with capital letters, new brands, which are being pushed through the mainstream press at every opportunity, particularly by the BBC. And that's why we're sort of making fun of it by calling it a trademark, but it is actually being pushed as a brand.
So let me get this straight. We've been studying science and virology and epidemiology as a civilization for a few hundred years, right? And all of a sudden, in the last 2-3 months, a whole new lexicon has been invented?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Can anybody prove that anybody has gotten ill or sick from any one of these variants? Can they prove that scientifically in a clinical setting? Have they done that yet? Is it possible? Has anybody done it? Or are we just in the realm of theory and pseudoscientific fantasy here?
These are good questions. So, of course, with variants and with vaccines, increasingly the talk is of vaccine passports. Passport, that word seems to be falling out of favour, as we'll see in a second. But what's been going on in Australia, Patrick?
Well, in New South Wales, they are now implementing a vaccine passport program. As far as we know, this is the first country that has officially begun to roll this out in Australia. This is the state of New South Wales. So let's take a look at a news clip just, I believe, from last night on this.
A vaccine passport held on your phone is being considered in New South Wales as the ADF is brought in to accelerate the rollout of the COVID jab. Let's go to our Sydney reporter now, Gabrielle Boyle. Gabby, good morning. How's this going to work?
Good morning, Sylvia. Well, for generations, Australians have been flashing their licence to prove their age, to get into a pub or club to have a drink. Now we could be flashing our New South Wales Services app to prove that we've had the vaccine and we're safe to go inside a venue. It's all part of a plan that the New South Wales state government is taking a very close look at. Imagine that. You want to go into a hospitality venue, you want to board an aeroplane, or you want to go into an entertainment premises. You simply pull out your phone and prove that you've had the vaccine, not only to protect other patrons inside that venue, but to protect people working inside those venues as well. And this could be in place in just a few months' time. All this as we receive confirmation that Australian Defence Force personnel will be called on to administer the vaccines, particularly in regional areas of New South Wales. Australian Defence Force doctors and nurses rolled out across the country to make sure that those most vulnerable at first are given the vaccine. Sylvia?
So isn't it incredible how the same types of narratives seem to be coming out right across the world? Nothing to do with rapid reaction mechanism there.
Completely streamlined. So again, you've got the troops on the street delivering vaccines. You've got the implementation of vaccine passports. They're calling it a service app in Australia, Mike. I mean, what on earth could they possibly be planning for the future? They're not even calling it the vaccine passport officially. It's unofficially a vaccine passport. They're calling it the services app. That means it's going to be used for access to everything. They've already got the no jab, no pay system with Australian benefits recipients, okay? So if you don't get the jabs or your children don't get the vaccines, you don't get the money, you don't get the benefits. They've been doing that for a few years in Australia. But so you can see if they manage to get traction on this, Mike, in Australia, they will add the COVID vaccine and all of the various updates of the vaccines onto this kind of quid pro quo benefit, no jab, no pay scheme. That's for single mothers, that's for schools, this is for income support, all of that.
And jobs as well, of course, but as we're seeing that narrative rolled out in this country as well. Well, what's the EU doing? Here is lesoir.be website. And well, let's just do a quick translation on this. A European certificate for travel, Didier Reynders, or whatever his name is, Reynders, is giving details apparently. So let's have a look at what he had to say. In the fact of having been ill, of having been vaccinated, or having undergone PCR tests is what's going to be on this certificate. Obviously, there'll be no discrimination. Of course not. The vaccine is not compulsory, but as you're hinting at with the Australian situation, what the British government is hinting at, what the mainstream media is hinting at with the no jab, no job policy, there'll be no discrimination except where there is. There won't be compulsion except where there is, because if you don't have the vaccine and you don't have an appropriate passport, you don't get access to services, you don't get access to the NHS, the health service, you don't get a job. And so on. What did Didier go on to say? These data, so the data that's collected under this, will be linked to the COVID pandemic. And when we come out of this pandemic, we will erase them. So they're not going to keep the data, don't worry. They're going to gather the data. They're going to use the data while there's a pandemic. But once the pandemic ends, they're going to erase all the data. He doesn't say anything about any of the data that's derived from the data that's collected. And as we'll see later on, this is a good question because the direction of travel is that data is manipulated, data is put through machine learning and AI, and policy comes out the other end.
And that's your medical records, just to be clear, right?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
That's you and your medical records.
Yes, that's correct. He went on to say it is a legislative instrument which will be binding on member states. So in other words, this is going to be a European Union directive. The goal is to adopt it on March the 17th in Commission and then in Parliament and Council, so we can have it in the summer. But what's interesting, as I was saying, is this is, if we look at the kinds of data that we're talking about, whether you've been ill, whether you've been vaccinated, whether you've undergone a PCR test, that's the kind of data we're talking about. And this is going to be available this summer for what? For traveling on holiday? For everything that you do?
Do you think any of the behavioral insights teams and any of these governments, Mike, will be interested in analyzing that big data set? What do you think?
Yes, quite a lot.
So it's going to be going to them as well.
But not just them, insurance companies, all kinds of business. This is a big question. Are people going to be able to get car insurance? Are you going to be able to get insurance for the things that you need insurance for day to day? What's your life insurance policy going to say? Whenever, is it going to have some implications based on your status with your app?
Or your private medical insurance in 10 years' time, possibly?
Indeed. But anyway, the point here is the EU saying not a passport, it's a certificate. Well, let's just have a look at this, because here is the latest number of signatures on the Do Not Roll Out a COVID-19 Vaccine Passport petition on the UK government website. 261,288 when I took this screen grab this morning. And so Parliament will apparently debate this petition on the 15th of March 2021, and you'll be able to watch that on the UK Parliament YouTube channel. But this is what they say in their statement. The government is reviewing whether COVID status certificates could play a role in reopening parts of our economy, reducing restrictions on social contact and improving safety. So Patrick, my question to you is it a coincidence that the British government and the EU government are using the term certificate rather than passport? Is that just a coincidence, or is there a unified policy being implemented here?
Yeah, they're using the term A because the vaccine passport will soon have a stigma attached to it because there's been some pushback and opposition. But the other thing is you're right, the certificate will be ubiquitous. So services app, as they're calling it in Australia.
So where does that take us with regard to the EU?
Well, here is, there she is, Mike.
In her carriage?
That's right. This is
she the Queen now?
Well, this is HRH, Ursula von der Leyen. She is the Queen of the European Union. And there she is in the horse and carriage with the footmen in tow and so forth and so on. So let's look at what Ursula has been up to with regards to her new travel pass with Europe. There she is with Herr Schwab there and at Davos, virtual Davos. And here's what's going on, Mike, with the European passport. The European Commission will discuss, notice how they're saying, we're just going to discuss it. They're practically already implemented it, okay? We're going to discuss the idea of a digital travel pass to boost tourism. There you go. They're saying that we can't have tourism unless we have this vaccine pass. In the UK, the same thing. People can't go back to work or leisure without some kind of digital certificate. So this is like the gate that they're creating. Rather than just lift the policy and say, go ahead, open up, go back to work, go travel. Instead of doing that, they're saying, no, it's not safe. So let's put this gateway in. And then you comply with that gateway, and then you can go, and then we can open up. So they've, again, they are in charge of this rat's maze, okay? They've designed the rat's maze, they practically implemented it, and they're deceiving the public by saying, oh, we're just thinking about it now, because they want to do that to stave off any opposition. They don't want any early opposition to this, like right now, this week, next week, and before March 17th. So basically, they're trying to keep the dogs off until they've already signed, sealed, and delivered it. So let's go back here. So the European Commission will discuss it, and then after that, so it could be introduced by July, according to Brussels.
Well, that's not quite in time for the whole holiday season then, so they'll certainly be missing a little bit of the holiday season.
Well, we could have some variant appear in the summer and could lock it down again. And then this would just give them another 6 months to implement this for next summer or next winter. So here we go. Now here's the kicker, Mike. All member states in the EU would need to buy in. So this is an all-for-one, one-for-all approach is what's needed here. So if there's any dissenting states, if there's any countries that aren't on board with this, the whole thing doesn't work. There needs to be 100% compliance. So the question is, where would the dissent come from on this? So one of the countries is Ireland, that's basically having a lot of protests, especially in the last couple of weeks. If you saw what happened in downtown Dublin, it was unbelievable. The scenes were incredible. So there's a lot of pushback in Ireland, which is interesting, on the fringe of Europe, as it were. Okay, on the other side of Britain, who is supposed to be out of the EU, we're told. Anyway, more about that later. But here is Leo Varadkar, and this is what he says so far regarding the vaccine passport. He said the vaccine passports don't yet stack up scientifically or medically because we just don't know at this stage what extent vaccines reduce transmission. Now that's a pretty reasonable statement, as reasonable as I've seen by some politicians, but it's still kind of wishy-washy here from the Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment here.
Former Prime Minister, of course.
Former Taoiseach, that's right. So this is where Ireland is. So they're not having a great success, Mike, in uptake in Ireland on this. So this is a bit of a problem. So will they be able to implement that with the Irish? And then this is also going to be this issue between travel between Ireland and the UK on this vaccine passport. So we might be back to the Brexit argument with the border between the north and the south, possibly. I don't know if you agree with me on that. But
it's all possible at this point. It's very unclear exactly how this is going to pan out. Yes.
So one thing's certain, they're trying to front run the opposition on this because they know that there's huge problems with this legally with regards to human rights, domestic law and constitutional rights, European Court of Human Rights, and also international law, having to compel people to take a medical procedure which they don't need, i.e. a vaccine for a respiratory virus that has a 99.9% recovery rate and only really affects people over 75 with multiple long-term chronic health conditions. So obviously compelling the whole population to be vaccinated with an experimental vaccine that hasn't gone through the proper regulatory regimes under a state of emergency, that's a bit of a problem in terms of international law.
Indeed, and it's quite an admission actually from Leo Varadkar there that we just don't know at this stage what extent vaccines reduce transmission.
Isn't that the whole point?
Yes.
So they're saying that it's to protect. You need to get vaccinated to protect the other people and protect workers and things like that. But does it protect them? Well, does it give you immunity? It doesn't, according to the manufacturers. Does it stop transmission? According to the manufacturers, it doesn't. So what does it do? What is the point of it? Oh, it reduces symptoms. Well, that's interesting. A lot of other pharmaceutical products, including drugs, pills, various treatments, reduce symptoms as well. So why not give people the option, besides vaccines, to take ivermectin, or if they want to take anti-malarial drugs, or there's a whole range of therapeutics. If the concern is that you're going to catch COVID, but when you get down to it, Mike, it shows how ridiculous the whole argument is.
Yeah.
But so let's look at what's happening in Europe. Now this is interesting. Let's look at the game plan here. How is this going to start? Well, it's already started. Take a look at this. Bilateral agreements have already been signed between these countries. This is Greece, and this is their neighbor Cyprus. Okay, they've signed a bilateral agreement on vaccine passports and COVID passes, basically, for travel between these two small southern European countries. And guess who's come in, Mike, for a trilateral agreement on this? None other than the state of Israel. So Israel is in there, so that means you have multiple bilateral agreements between these three countries, okay? And so that's for the jab, basically. So I don't know if you covered it in previous programs or not, but people will know that Israel has gone hell for leather on their own internal vaccine passports. They already have it. They're restricting people to go to work, access to supermarkets, everything, all services, everything. So Israel's probably the most aggressive country on the planet. In terms of vaccine compliance, okay, and it's created an apartheid type two-tiered society already. There's a huge protest movement in Israel over this, and we might cover that in a future program. But let's take a look at this. So look at this situation here with this trilateral agreement, Mike. And so what did we talk about last week on this program? Well, we talked about this. The UK and Greece colluding to push new vaccine passport on holiday travelers. So what does that mean? Well, we're saying that there's now pressure on Brussels because of this. The UK in the background, maneuvering, has put pressure on Brussels to move quicker on the issue and bypass any due process, any legal reviews on vaccine passports. So let's take a look again at this picture. What does that mean? Well, look at this. That means you've got the same bilateral agreements. Britain locks right in there with Greece, thus with Cyprus and with Israel. This is how this regime is going to be rolled out. And what does that mean, Mike? Look at that.
Yeah.
That's the EU as well. So we're told that Brexit happened again, and you have Britain going absolutely headfirst into a full-on European regulatory, effectively biosurveillance, biometric, digital ID, vaccine passport system here.
And this is exactly the model that's been used to build up European defence. It's the same model, bilateral agreements between various EU member states, and then at some point in the future, those all get merged together into some unified regime right across the European Union.
So it becomes policy by Fiat, basically, and they managed to evade any press or any media or any real public pushback by doing this behind the scenes in a bilateral fashion. So let's go back and look at this now. Let's take a look at what is this really, Mike? Well, we've talked a lot about on this program in the past about what? Well, we've talked about this. global Britain. So if you think about this regime here, look at this, think about this on a global scale. Why is Britain the hardest lockdown country? Why are they pushing all of these measures? They're pushing vaccines, they're pushing vaccine passports, they're running a harder lockdown regime than any other country in the world, according to a recent index. Okay, so Britain is running point on this new ID system, this new, basically, this creation of Davos, this great reset mechanism system of digital identities and vaccines from cradle to grave, okay? So Britain is running point on that. Through Global Britain, they'll be able to do this with multiple bilateral deals. Singapore will also be a key part of this. That will be the hub of Asia to implement this in the Asia Pacific region, okay? Singapore is already advanced. In fact, Singapore is hosting the Davos Summit.
Yes.
The World Economic Forum Summit. That is no coincidence that it's being done in Singapore. Singapore is Britain's outpost in Southeast Asia, okay? And they're the most aggressive on biosurveillance right now. I could tell you horror stories about the stuff that's going on in Singapore with regards to, you know, personal rights, privacy, and so forth. You know, it is full-on technocracy there. And so that's the proving ground. That's the beta testing ground. So Britain will lock into that. And then bring all of these other countries in the EU, will lock in all together. Next thing you know, you have this international system that nobody voted on, that nobody debated on, there were no legal reviews done on, and it's just policy, and it's just the norm, basically. This is what's happening right now. So this leads us to this other question here. Let's take a look at this. Well, we flagged this up this week. What happened to Brexit, Mike? There's Boris Johnson following his boss, perhaps, Ursula von der Leyen. So the UK and the EU are coordinating, actively coordinating to push through vaccine passports. Let's look at this. This is from the Prime Minister's own spokesperson here. You can expect the department to work with and speak to countries across the world on this. And we'll bring that quote up again. And basically, in terms of how they may look at introducing the passports, this is the Prime Minister's spokesperson. It's already been decided, okay? They're just basically playing like they're reviewing it. And so you look at the BBC, COVID-19, how will an NHS vaccine passport app work? So you can see this is this sort of...
We're all being primed for this.
That's right here. This is nudging. This is nudging right here. The BBC is working hand in glove. So the person who's in charge supposedly of reviewing this, Mike, what stellar person in the cabinet? What...
Oh, I'm sure it's somebody that's sitting in the cabinet office, perhaps.
Someone that's a paragon of morality
and truth
and integrity, right? Someone who's basically got the backs of the British people on this, right? Who could that be? Let's have a look. It's none other than, well, there he is. It's Michael Gove. So all of this is being put into the hands of Michael Gove. Fantastic article here by a great publication, The Conservative Woman. There's a lot of great articles on this website. I encourage people to go look at it. So Farewell Integrity, the Michael Gove story. This is by Daniel Miller, and this is just a really damning piece, Mike. Here, the price of admission to the cabinet has been the surrender of his critical intelligence and demonstrated by his enthusiastic support for a third lockdown and the incineration of his moral framework. That's pretty harsh, Mike, but it gets worse. It is Gove who presides in the Cabinet Office over the Behavioral Insights team, a group whose psychological warfare campaign against the British people represents one of the most naked abuses of science for political purposes since the Second World War. That's pretty harsh and probably warranted.
And very accurate, yes.
And it goes on. Thus, he has now put Gove, he's talking about Boris, in charge of leading the, quote, review of vaccine passports in the expectation that he will complete the surrender of his soul by smoothing the path to the birth of a CCP, Chinese Communist Party, surveillance state in Great Britain. And a lot of people would say that's no exaggeration because that's exactly the direction of travel of this policy.
I think in his mind's eye, he's looking at something much bigger than that.
A new position?
No, I'm talking about bigger than a Chinese-style surveillance state. They look at China with envy in this respect.
Absolutely, they do. And finally here, on completing this task, Gove will be dispensed with, the final tragic gesture of a completed failed career. Yet, here there is a certain irony. As the only minister with anything like a moral character, this is debatable now, even if a compromised one, Gove is amongst the few politicians in Europe with the possibility of a redemption arc. So they're leaving the door open for potential redemption here. I'm not sure if I agree with that part.
Not a chance.
But nonetheless, that's what's being said. So great piece amongst many great pieces at that website. So Mike, so what's happened in the last couple of weeks? We've seen a lot of these anti-lockdown, high-profile dissidents, journalists, former law lords, and so forth. They've all capitulated to the vaccine passport issue, almost in a preemptive fashion. So they didn't put up any fight at all. And a lot of people are scratching their heads saying, what's going on here? Well, Peter Hitchens, you'll know during this week here, this was his column last Sunday, I've had my COVID jab and all it cost me was my freedom, said Peter Hitchens on his blog, and was roundly attacked after this by all of his supporters, many of them anyway, on Twitter here. So sorry, Your Majesty, he's talking to the Queen here rhetorically, but I have had my first COVID vaccinations for wholly selfish reasons. I did not do it for the good of others, but for my own convenience. And Hitchens remarked that he wanted to visit his family who lived abroad, and he was tired of not seeing them. You know, so I mean, he could have visited them in the summer, so it hasn't really been that long per se. But anyway, he has his personal reasons for doing this. So he's basically saying we've lost the war, we've lost the battle.
That's what he was hinting at. But then, of course, was it yesterday? The Unheard released the interview with Lord Sumption. Well, they tried to salvage some positivity out of it. They headlined the item on their website as Lord Sumption, Civil Disobedience has begun. And so they had various quotes. I do recommend you read the whole thing or you watch the whole thing, but they pull out a few quotes. For example, this one, where he's saying that he feels sad we have the kind of laws which public-spirited people may need to break and so on, and he's encouraging that. But it was probably this section that we're about to see now which disappointed people the most. Let's have a listen to this.
But different behaviours for the vaccinated and non-vaccinated, in a lot of people's minds, will start making them think about vaccine passports and, you know, documents that show which stream you're in, which poses new problems to liberty, doesn't it?
Well, it does. I do not have strong views about vaccine passports. They are an invasion of privacy, but the information in question is on government computers or NHS computers anyway, certainly whether you've been vaccinated or not is. So that I think the privacy concerns can be overstated. I do not like a world in which you have to produce a document in order to justify partaking in the ordinary activities of human existence any more than the next person. The trouble is that the alternative is even worse. I would prefer a system which was entirely voluntary and which trusted people. But given that I don't think that that is a politically feasible option, I think that we have got to choose the least bad thing. And to my mind, a vaccine passport is a lot less bad than simply indiscriminately depriving everybody of what makes life worth living.
Are you not worried that it's actually quite a major change in the way we run our society to suddenly say that every human being needs to take the latest government-mandated vaccine and produce a document to prove it? Otherwise, they are essentially outcasts. They may not be able to go to a restaurant, get on an airplane, go to the cinema. That sounds like quite a big step.
Yes, it is, and I think it's a regrettable step. And if people were prepared to trust each other and to rely on non-coercive measures, we wouldn't need it. But I recognise that most of my fellow citizens want coercive measures, and therefore it is incumbent on us, I think, to think of the least intrusive and the least objectionable coercive measure.
So the least intrusive, the least objectionable coercive measure, that what many people that have spoken to me about that particular interview have said was how apparently uncomfortable he was all the way through it.
He looked physically, like he was
his
fidgeting.
body language was very much
Like he was under duress, in a way. Yeah.
Like he was presenting some information which he knew was either against his own views in reality, or was certainly not going to be popular, and I think it certainly isn't. But I mean, you know, if we start off with what he said at the beginning, he was talking about the privacy concerns being overstated because your status is on NHS computers anyway. Well, of course, the point here is that your data is not going to be staying on NHS computers. Your data is going to be shared. Who's it going to be shared with? We've mentioned insurance companies already. This, I think, is a major problem, sharing this type of data with insurance companies. Obviously, airlines, and obviously the app producers in the first place.
And behavioral insights teams and law enforcement and so forth.
Right, so a whole range of people that are going to get access to health-related information which they didn't previously have access to. The government will undoubtedly claim that data is secure, encrypted end-to-end, or such like. But is this something? I mean, if Sumption's saying that that the general public can't be trusted in order to run a trust-based system for this, that we've got to use coercive measures instead, if that's really his position. Is the government any more trustworthy than the general public? Well, in fact, I would say that the government is by orders of magnitude less trustworthy than the general public. So,
it's an obvious question.
So, yes. So where is this data going to go? And I think he's massively understating the risks in that.
But it's not just, to me, the whole data argument on this, Mike, is important, but it's also a red herring. Okay, he's saying it's not politically feasible to have a volunteer-based system or a Swedish-style system of governance. I mean, what is he talking about? The reason it's not politically feasible is because there is no political leadership who's offering that as an option, as leading the country towards a more common sense policy. That's why it's not politically feasible, because government, the mainstream media, big pharma, and all of these NGOs, like the World Health Organization, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, like the Wellcome Trust, they're all acting like a cartel, Mike. They're acting like a cartel. They are fixing policy. So of course it's not politically feasible. And it probably, it would help if you had persons of conscience like Lord Sumption raising the real fundamental issues on this, not about data privacy, but is it medically feasible? Is it scientifically feasible? The fundamental basis of this policy. What is the fundamental basis of it? Is it sound? Is it based on any real science? And we've talked about, there's so many problems with the claims made by political people about these vaccines, about their effectiveness, about what they actually do. Do they actually protect people? These are fundamental questions that are not being debated, that are being heavily censored by Silicon Valley, by omission in the mainstream media, by politicians, of course.
But it's more than that. If you go back a level even further, there's the question of whether any of this policy that we've seen in the last 12 months has been necessary in the first place, because of the very nature of SARS-CoV-2, how infectious it is, and more importantly, what kind of mortality it produces. So when you go back to that level, and then you ask the question, did we need to be rolling out this vaccination program in the first place? Did we need to be rolling out these lockdowns in the first place? And the evidence for me is absolutely clear that we did not. And that the evidence for me is quite clear that if it hadn't been for the behavioral scientists involved in this and the mainstream media cooperation with the behavioral scientist message, none of this would have happened. Not only that, on that meta level that you're talking about, Mike, the testing regime, PCR tests being used to generate the data for cases, for deaths, for, quote, infections. Yeah. And it's now been proven, that the PCR test is wildly inaccurate and not fit for purpose to be used as a medical diagnostic tool.
That basically destroys the whole premise of ramping up this as a, quote, global pandemic and a mountain of false positives, junk data that's being used in order to drive policy that's based on what? At the end of the day, that's based on junk data.
Yeah.
So those are the fundamental questions that we should be asking. It's not just coercion, the last thing I'll say. This is not coercion. This is extortion. You are using this compliance for a medical procedure as extortion for somebody to go about and do things that they are well within their rights to do. Freedom of movement, freedom of travel, freedom to shop, to do commerce, to work, to go and get an education, to get medical care. You're withholding all of these rights based on this kind of, you have to take these vaccines this year. Next month it'll be 2 more. It'll be 4 more the next year until the next variant comes.
Yeah.
So where does it end?
Good question. So where does that leave us then with respect to the lockdown dissenters?
Well, there we go. If you know your history, European history, a lot of people will know what that image is, Mike. That's in France. That's the Maginot Line, but more about that later. So lockdown dissenters on the right, and this is very interesting. So just in the last week, we have Peter Hitchens. He has more or less surrendered to the vaccine passport issue. And then we have Lord Sumption. And Nigel Farage also is very pro-vaccine, isn't he?
Yes.
He's taken a public position on this. So this is the sort of rebel right, if you will, in Britain. And so all of these people are basically on board with vaccine passports, every single one of them. So there you go. Yes to vaccine passports. So there's your opposition on the right in terms of mainstream figures, Mike. So isn't that interesting? Where does that leave us in terms of any viable opposition on these issues? Where is the opposition going to come from? That's the question.
Yes.
And so what I'm saying is, if you're waiting for, you're relying on some of these mainstream figures to basically take the state to task on the veracity and legitimacy of some of these policies, you're going to be waiting a long time. Don't hold your breath.
So what's going on in the United States then?
Well, the idea of vaccine passports is not theoretical, Mike. New York has now made it compulsory to go see any sporting events or any large venues. You have to have a vaccine passport, and it's done by phone. So you have to show your ID plus show your vaccinations or your positive test results. So they've already implemented it.
And negative test results, I hope.
Negative test results, yes. So the LA Unified School District, this is the largest school district in the United States, millions of students in Los Angeles Basin area. They have now announced, Mike, a full biometric vaccine passport for all students. They need this or they cannot attend school. It's compulsory. So this is now policy. We're going to show you a very disturbing video, okay? Shocking. This is how they're marketing it, okay? It's very dark, okay? But it's got a real kind of happy clappy music track to it. And guess who's running the program? Microsoft. Enough said. Let's watch this presentation.
Hello. I know you're taking the time to watch because you care, and you don't want your child to miss the opportunity to come back to school as soon as possible and in the safest way possible. That's why I'm here today with a big announcement, and you're the first I'm sharing it with. During the past many months, we've been working hand in hand with Microsoft to create a great solution to bring students, teachers, and all who work in schools back to school in the safest way possible. It's a real breakthrough for keeping your child safe when they come back to school. It's called the Daily Pass.
Thank you, Austin. At Microsoft, our top priority is helping educators, students, and their caregivers.
I'm not quite sure what happened there, Patrick. Apologies about
So
that.
there's an animated part to that's a quite stunning video. So we'll have to put the link in
We will,
below
yes.
below today's news so you can direct people to that.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay, let's come back to Didier Redner's. And these data will be linked to COVID pandemic, and when we come out of this pandemic, we will erase them, is what the European Commissioner for Justice was saying about the COVID-19 data. Well, the UK government has, this is a Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, and they have decided, or they've just run a poll, and they've decided that the public believe that digital technology has a role to play in tackling the pandemic, but its potential is not fully realised. They say that public support for greater use of digital technology depends on trust in how it's governed. So we've got the trust narrative back once again. And conventional data analysis has been more widely used in the COVID-19 response than AI. So this comes back to my point earlier. If the data is deleted, as the EU is claiming it will be, actually, will any of the data analysis, will all that data be deleted or not, as well or not? I suspect not. But we don't need to worry, because according to John Whittingdale, we're determined to build back better. Where have we heard that phrase many times?
I keep hearing it over and over again.
Yes, that would be Great Reset.
Yeah, that's from Davos.
And capitalise on all we've learned from the pandemic, which is force us to share data quickly, efficiently and responsibly, but it's for the public good. So that's all we need to worry about. It's going to be shared, but it's for the public good. This needs to be questioned. This needs to be resisted, I think.
Definitely.
Now, not all going well for on the vaccination front in Europe, because AstraZeneca, the vaccine, has now been, well, the Australians can forget about it, because the Italians have blocked its transfer to Australia, its export to Australia. There's a massive fight going on in the EU, apparently over vaccination availability. And the question I have, Patrick, is what's that all about? Is it really that there isn't the vaccine available? Is it really that, as the EU is trying to present, Britain is taking all the vaccines from all the manufacturers? Or is it that, in fact, there's very little demand in the EU, and they're trying to build a narrative, a behavioural insights style narrative, which will bring about demand through building a story that your vaccine's been taken away from you?
It's not just a behavioral insights narrative, Mike. It's straight marketing, basically. You create artificial scarcity in the media by saying something short. There's a shortage of something, and then next thing you know, people are queuing up for it. It works for everything from toilet paper to vaccines. So it's an tried and true, tested, and it always works.
Yes. Piers Morgan. Our favourite presenter on television, Pat.
Yes, Piers Morgan is the host of Good Morning Britain. If you watch that program, I don't know anybody who does, but we do come across the clips of it from sometimes. So Piers Morgan has been virtue signaling, as people know, on lockdown and vaccines, and offering on camera to be taking it with Matt Hancock to get jabbed on camera. You remember that?
Yes.
So and so he's come out recently. He had Dr. Hilary Jones, who's a sort of a television, high-profile TV doctor, right? He had Hilary Jones on recently. Watch this clip, and basically they're really upset because NHS staff are not taking the vaccine for some reason. And Piers Morgan is just beside himself. And Hilary Jones is offering a scientific explanation as to why.
It's said that as many as 200,000 NHS and care employees have refused to take the jab despite being offered it and despite working in close proximity to very vulnerable, sick people. I've talked about this a lot, but I'm appalled by this. Yeah. And I really think it's not acceptable. And if you work in NHS and care work, and you're a potential risk to the people you're caring for, you either have the jab or you don't go to work, I think.
Look, we know that about 450 or more COVID cases a day are required in hospitals. So if you've got staff who are potentially able to transmit the virus to you, they shouldn't be in that hospital. Would you expect a surgeon to operate on you if they were HIV positive? Would you expect a surgeon to operate if you hepatitis B positive? No, they're not allowed to. So if you've got staff who could infect their patients, then they're not being professionally responsible. Now, I know a lot of them are not on the front line. I know a lot of them are on almost minimum wage.
But they're working.
It's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant.
If they're looking after patients, they should.
It doesn't matter how much they
protect the patients by
it's where they're working. They're working inside hospitals and care homes. Yep. And we know that 25% or more of infections are happening inside hospitals.
Yes.
What do you think of that?
I think he's very upset. about things.
So Dr. Hilary Jones is saying that the NHS staff not taking the COVID vaccine is the equivalent of them being HIV super spreaders running around hospitals. I mean, absolutely a preposterous thing to say on national TV by a supposed qualified doctor there. But the point is, it's that you're assumed to be infectious and dangerous unless vaccinated. Tell me what is scientific about that assumption?
Nothing at all.
It flies in the face of hundreds of years of good medical practice. But this is the sort of hysteria and wild hypochondria rhetoric that we're seeing on our mainstream top flagship morning shows in the country. So Piers Morgan, you just remember, he's having a go at the NHS staff, Mike. Well, it wasn't long ago that Piers Morgan has the NHS as his profile on Twitter. He took it off recently, but here he is. Basically, he was, they were saying that he shouldn't get his. That he shouldn't get his vaccine before somebody who needed it. So he's saying, I'm a key worker, Piers Morgan, because I'm a journalist covering coronavirus. So I am essential key worker. This was in May of 2020. So I mean, he's been doing this now for months and browbeating people who are questioning any of the policies or the lockdowns. He's literally an extension of Boris Johnson on mainstream TV. And what are Piers Morgan's qualifications to really know what he's talking about for any of this? He's just a pundit. He's a highly paid, I don't know what he gets paid per year, probably in the millions.
Yes. But
he gets paid, doesn't have any particular skill set or expertise, but yet he is browbeating the public at every turn. And he brings on Dr. Hilary Jones and accuses 200,000 NHS staff of being the equivalent of HIV spreaders in the health system. I mean, unbelievable. I think a public apology or just disappearing and not being on TV anymore.
Sadly, neither of those is likely, but there you go. But anyway, look, let's bring this on screen. This is the Zero COVID campaign, and of course we were talking about this last week as well. This is the campaign to beat the pandemic, because apparently the UK must aim to eliminate COVID-19, and to do this, it must close unsafe workplaces, support self-isolation, and run test and trace locally in the public sector. Well, they're holding an event in Scotland because apparently it's going to be called A Door to COVID, to Zero COVID. It's going to have various MPs, MSPs and medical people, plus people from the, who's behind this? People representing the groups behind this, perhaps. So let's just have a quick look at who the affiliated organisations are. And so we've got the unions. We've got Defend Our NHS, we've got more unions and more unions,
councils.
And more unions, some councils, and we've got the Young Communist League at the end.
Oh, that's interesting. So they have an interest in this policy, don't they? They're very pro zero COVID, the communists on this. I mean, we're not being flippant, Mike, here.
No, we're not.
This is real. A lot of the communist political groups, and certainly the labor unions have been backing this idea of a general strike, that you shouldn't go back to work unless the government can guarantee that your workplace is 100% safe. What does that even mean? How long is a piece of string? So this is health and safety culture gone completely on steroids, and it's really being backed by the hard left. If you look at schools being closed, Mike, not just in Britain, but also in America, the people that are holding up the opening of schools, allowing children to get the education that they're entitled to, the people holding that up are the teachers' unions at almost every turn. They're the biggest obstacle to allowing kids to get the education that they're paying for, okay, in their taxes and so forth. Okay, so the teachers' unions, the unions in general, are basically taking advantage of this crisis, of this situation, in order to leverage some additional political power. We said that at the very beginning of this a year ago,
yes,
and it's still true today. So completely, in my opinion, Mike, totally opportunistic from a political point of view, but I think dangerous as well. But they are very much singing the script of the Great Reset, all of those organizations that you've listed. So there is a nice convenient overlap between the hard left the Great Reset and this idea of zero COVID. And isn't it interesting, Mike, the people saying zero COVID, they're also saying zero something else as well, aren't they?
They are, zero carbon, and we'll be coming on to that in just a minute. So if you like what the UK Column does and you would like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, and there are options to help us out there, and that'd be very much appreciated. And also share our material on the various platforms. Now, just a reminder that Lynda Thayer's legal expenses campaign is still running. If you would like to contribute to that, please do so. That's a very important campaign, in my opinion, because Lynn, of course, she's out on bail from a French prison at the moment, and really unjustifiable what's going on there. So any help that can be possibly given would be much appreciated. If you want to get the background to this, go onto the UK Column website, scroll right down to the bottom, and there's an article there called GCMAF and the Persecution of David Noakes, Lynn Thayer and Immuno Biotech. And of course, we've got to remember this prosecution in the UK and the prosecution in France at the behest of the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority in the UK. This is the same organisation that's given the emergency approval to the vaccines that we've been talking about. Okay, let's move on to this. The Gambling Commission. Everybody would be glad to know that the Gambling Commission has received the reappointment of two of its commissioners. First of all, John Bailey here and Catherine Seddon. So these two have been reappointed. Why were we worried about that? Because we're wondering whether they will be making use of any covert intelligence sources in the not too distant future, because as we warned you about when it was going through Parliament, it has now received royal assent. That's the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Criminal Conduct Act 2021, and that means that the Gambling Commission, amongst others, are entitled to use covert human intelligence sources, and they're entitled to permit them to use criminal conduct in the course of their covert activity. So let's just remember what this was saying. It's a bill, it was a bill, it's now an act to make provision for in connection with the authorization of criminal conduct in the course of or otherwise in connection with the conduct of covert human intelligence sources. And it authorizes conduct by officials and agents of the security intelligence services, law enforcement, and certain other public authorities which would otherwise constitute criminality. Now, at the time, James Brokenshire said that the legislation was being introduced to keep our country safe, because that is the justification for everything that's going on at the moment, is keeping the country, keeping people safe. He went on to say to ensure that our operational agencies and public authorities have access to the tools and intelligence they need to keep us safe. They keep reinforcing this idea of safety. Throughout history, those entrusted with to uphold the law and safeguard national security have used covert human intelligence to support and progress their activities, from Sir Francis Walsingham's use of informers to defend the reign of Elizabeth I and so on. So, but it's all about keeping us safe. So let's have briefly a look at who can authorise this criminality: any police force, the National Crime Agency, the Serious Fraud Office, any of the intelligence services, any of Her Majesty's forces, armed forces that is, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the Department for Health and Social Care, the Home Office, the Ministry of Justice can all authorise criminality, the Competition and Markets Authority, the Environment Agency, the Financial Conduct Authority, the Food Standards Agency, and the Gambling Commission. Now, at the time, James Brokenshire, when this was being introduced to Parliament, said that he wanted to point out that the Food Standards Agency is required to deal with issues associated with misrepresented food that may be harmful for human consumption. So that justifies the use of criminal activity by covert agents. And he also mentioned the fact, or the alleged fact, that there was specific reference to the Human Rights Act in the bill. Well, I'm going to be very interested to see to what degree the government stands on the Human Rights Act and the European Convention on Human Rights when it comes to vaccine passports and discrimination with vaccine passports. So it's very interesting that they attempted to stand on this to get this legislation through Parliament at the time. It is now an act. It has received royal assent on Wednesday.
So it's almost like it's the legalization of like Stasi-type secret police forces, giving people license to break the law, commit crimes in order to get, quote, intelligence.
This is absolutely right.
I'd love to hear Lord Sumption comment on this. It's definitely in his wheelhouse, I would think, as a former Chief Justice, and maybe Peter Hitchens as well.
Yes.
What he has to say about this kind of legislation. Very shocking.
Yes, and if anybody wants to get a pretty good overview of this thing, this is The Spectator from the time. This was October 2020 when the bill was really working its way through the House of Commons and so on. If you look for the article, it's called The Terrifying Consequences of the Licence to Kill Bill.
What about the House of Lords, Mike? Did they not push back on? Where is the Lords on this?
Not in any substantive way. The House of Lords really isn't functioning at the moment.
And why would that be?
I think there's a view that because the House of Lords are generally older, from the older generation, the members of the House of Lords, that really they shouldn't be in the House of Lords.
It's too dangerous.
It's too dangerous for them, and therefore everything's being done remotely via Zoom or whatever. And are they the best people with this type of technology? I'm not entirely sure, but certainly there doesn't seem to be the same level of pushback and oversight and amendment from the House of Lords that we might have seen in the past.
So the pandemic, the COVID is the gift that keeps on giving, for some anyway.
Yes. Yes. Okay, let's come on to the issue of the Great Reset, and particularly with respect to farming, because Michael Gove features once again in this. Well, this is the Sustainable Development Impact Summit, and this took place last year, September, and it was talking about farming and so on, and the sustainability of farming. Agricultural practices by the world's farmers cannot be changed through shifts in consumption alone, apparently. It's not a secret that farmers need tools to adapt to outdated agricultural practices given climate change. And until now, most of the change has been pushed by the consumer. But to truly reset this, change needs to come and start from the farmers, and we can help support them to do that. Is what the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum is saying. So why are we mentioning this? Well, a number of years ago, I think it was 2017, Michael Gove said this: the UK has 30 to 40 years away from the fundamental eradication of soil fertility. So he was saying that really the UK farming industry had 30 to 40 harvests left, and that was really it. Now he was echoing comments from others. Only 100 harvests left in UK farm soils. Scientists warned. This is from Sheffield University in 2014, and they were claiming 100 harvests then. But it's not just the UK, because globally, this is Scientific American, only 60 years of farming left if soil degradation continues. Well, the question is, and was, is there any truth to this? Would Michael Gove have been less than truthful? Would that be possible? Well, let's have a look at this, because this was released last month, actually mid-January. Didn't see it until last week. This is Our World in Data. Our World in Data is sort of a sustainable, pro-sustainability, pro-Millennium Development Goals website, but it's run out of Oxford University. And this particular article, Do We Only Have 60 Harvests Left? By Dr. Hannah Ritchie. Well, this is what she has to say, but the 60 harvests claim is quite clearly false. So I do recommend people go and have a look at this. There's a whole section on this, on the lifespans of the world soils. And she's saying that they span 5 orders of magnitude. So let's have a look at exactly what it's saying here. More than 90% of the conventionally managed soils had a lifespan greater than 60 years. The median was 491 years for thinning soils. Half had a lifespan greater than 1,000 years, and 18% exceeded 10,000 years.
So Gove was slightly off.
Just slightly off, as if he would lie. But then it goes on to say, Michael Gove said the UK had only 30 to 40 years of harvest left because it was drenching them with chemicals. And the point that she makes is that, in fact, shifting to a no-till approach often requires more pesticides and fertilizers, not less. So the fact is that in the UK, most arable farmers are operating a no-till regime already. So, you know, the criticism isn't justified as usual with these things. But the article goes on to say, people will often argue that while extreme headlines may be untruthful, they're worth it if they force people to take action. I don't buy it, says Hannah Ritchie. It can be damaging in many ways. And I just thought that was a really interesting way to end the article, because that could equally be applied to the whole COVID approach.
And also to climate change as well, because that's the sort of impetus behind climate change, is we need to raise the alarm. As Greta Thunberg says, our house is on fire. And the World Economic Forum says, you know, climate change is happening because of climate change, fill in the blanks, basically. But when you look at the actual data from the even the IPC scientists, how much climate change is happening? Nobody can really answer that question, not in the short term at least. So is there actually global warming happening? So why are we doing lining up all these policies and restructuring our economy, restructuring society on Earth because of, quote, climate change?
This is a very contentious topic for many people, and I know that some people watching this program that have come to the UK column as a result of our coverage of COVID are going to disagree with our position on this. But when you look at the way the SARS-CoV-2 science has been done, and you compare it with the way that the climate change science has been done over the last 30, 40 years, there are major parallels to be drawn there.
It's computer modeling, for
yes,
instance.
for instance. And so, you know, if you are struggling with our position on this, I urge you to actually take a step back and look at it again.
Look at it more critically. Just like you look at claims of a global pandemic more critically, we also have to apply the same critical focus on claims about man-made global warming, yes, aka climate change, because the two things are very much linked, and as you say, Mike, they're so parallel in terms of their likeliness.
Yes. Now, the PPCA Global Summit was taking place this week. It ended yesterday. This is all about coal and reducing the amount of coal usage in the world. So the UK and Canadian governments, co-chairs of the PPCA, were co-hosting this virtual summit to boost international commitment and cooperation, shift away from coal power generation ahead of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, which of course is taking place in November in Glasgow. This is Alex Sharma. He was speaking at it, of course, and he had this to say: in the UK, we have cut the proportion of coal in our energy mix from 40% in 2012 to less than 2% today. Well, if you were watching UK Column News Extra, you got a little bit of a preview of this, because, well, unfortunately, 2% today, he's not quite accurate about that, because if we look at what's going on with electricity generation today or any day this week, there has been zero wind, there's been no sunlight, and so really the renewables sources of energy haven't been providing the goods, and so coal is actually providing 5% of our energy mix at this point in time. But that's...
And natural gas is providing...
57%.
So all they've done is replace a lot of what was being used with coal with natural gas.
Yes.
So from one fossil fuel to another fossil fuel that's supposedly green. So this is a shell game on so many levels.
Yes, it certainly is. But so what's really behind it? Well, I think we get a clue from articles like this, again from Scientific American. Africa needs fossil fuels to end energy apartheid. The fact is, Patrick, as we highlighted on this program a couple of weeks ago, if we were to replace the current car fleet in the UK with electric cars, we would need over 200% of the global production of cobalt just to replace the UK's car fleets, never mind any other country on the planet. And of course, where's cobalt mined?
In Africa?
In Africa.
By children?
By children. So if Africa needs fossil fuels and they're permitted to use fossil fuels for their energy production, then Africa might decide to sort of develop So that would mean that they may want access to cobalt for their own purposes.
Ooh,
that
we
would
can't
be
have
that
that.
would be tricky. So we
can't
couldn't have that. And then I'd just like to highlight this. Of course, this is the current narrative that it's the dirty Chinese that are going into Africa and encouraging them to use coal in Africa, and that really has to be discouraged as well.
Last week, or 2 weeks ago, Mike, the wind and solar basically died in Germany. Germany is the greenest government in terms of so-called renewables in the world. So guess what they did? They had to fire up the coal plants, Mike. Otherwise, Germany would have froze to death. This was just a couple of weeks ago. So again, a lot of this is rhetoric and kind of greenwashing. What's behind this, Mike, is a huge multi-trillion-dollar industry that a lot of people with money are lining up to basically harvest a totally new market that's driven by this idea of climate change.
Yes. Look, we'll just finish off with this one, Patrick, because here is, well, what is it? It's a B-1 bomber. What kind of weapons do these carry?
Nuclear?
Yes. So this is landing in Norway. We mentioned a few weeks ago that this was going to happen. It has now happened, and NATO has just released some video of it. So here it is on screen. So this is the first time in history that the US Air Force B-1Bs have been running sorties from Norway. Where do you think they're flying? Well, they're flying over the Baltic states, of course, because why do we want to do that? We've got to keep the pressure on Russia. They're part of a Bomber Task Force Europe mission, which allows US pilots to familiarize themselves with the airspace and their NATO allies through a series of training exercises. And it's the first time that these aircraft have flown out of Norway. So that's what's going on. I can't imagine that Russia would be upset about that in any way, shape, or form. Can you?
No, it's just another provocation. This is just kind of keeping the NATO machine churning. That's all.
Yes. Well, okay, we will leave it there for today. Thank you very much for joining us today. Patrick, thank you for joining us. We'll be back at the same time as usual, 1 p.m. on Monday. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.